which kind of brings down the overall median, is renters. So the median renter household income in Whitefish Bay is almost 60, or it's a little bit over 60,000, whereas in Shorewood it's like 45, 46. So that's really where you're kind of seeing that disparity, and it's bringing the overall median down. So that's kind of the first thing. Distribution of income, much considerably higher in the eastern portion of the village, essentially 3 times what it is in the southwestern portion. Again, that's tying to those sort of tenure patterns too, as to where owners are concentrated and where renters are concentrated. And as far as sort of age, you know, how the median incomes are distributed across age groups, you know, you can kind of see it's almost sort of a bell curve type shape, whereas those in sort of the middle earning years cohorts are where the highest incomes are concentrated, and then once you get to sort of the senior retirement age, then income drops off fairly dramatically. So that's pretty typical what we see here.
It's phenomenal. It cuts in half across that line. From 132 to 65.
Mm-hmm.
I get why, but
Mm-hmm.
it's dramatic.
And Rachel, in your experience of working with other communities, are these distributions, how would you characterize these income distributions for Shorewood? Is this well in line with what you see? Are these outside the norm? Is this a wider distribution?
I would say, so as far as the age distribution, that's pretty typical. As far as, I mean, to me, and this might be more anecdotal, but to me what kind of struck me was, I think in most communities, especially of this size, it's rare to see such a disparity between census tracts. I mean, Shorewood only has 4 census tracts, 13,000 people. To see such a wide disparity in income, you don't really see that often in a community of this size. And I mean, it is largely driven by the number of renters, number of student renters that typically have fairly low income. But that definitely struck me looking at the data. And then also just, I think the impact that the student population has on income, because if, as I said, when you break down the owner data between Shorewood and Whitefish Bay, they're basically, comparable. But when you look at it on an overall median, there's a significant difference.
Yeah. Do we have any breakdown of the renters between non-family and family households? Because I do think there's distinct populations of renters, and like and for us in our thinking, like for student housing, I mean, we're providing student housing to UWM, but that's kind of more of a regional thing, whereas I think there are families who are here for schools and other amenities, are longtime residents, can't afford to buy but want to stay in Shorewood. I mean, to me, they're distinct populations in terms of what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what did I try to say? The student renters probably really skew this
That's what's
a
even more
lot,
dramatic
because,
about that.
I mean, a lot of their income is probably negative.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
minimal,
I don't even know
most
if you
likely.
go negative, but
I
mean, basically,
so high.
especially
Includes them.
that section, right on the south end of the village.
Mhm.
So, I don't know if this is possible, but it'd be nice, it'd almost be nice to see what this looks like without the people who have any income. Cause does that make sense?
Yeah.
That
Because
couple section of the
when
wall,
I was in
even
college, I
higher.
had 0 income. And if someone asked me what my income was, it was 0.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think
Because I didn't have a job, I was working, I was going to school. So, is that,
Were they
that's
captured
in
that?
here, right? If there's 4 dudes living in a 3-bedroom apartment and none of them are working, you got 4 people with 0 income. That seems like it's gonna skew this way down.
So it sounds like, kind of to recap, what I'm hearing is, if we could include sort of more of a breakdown of, among that sort of renter cohort, what is that distribution? And then also, the distribution of family versus
Yeah, I think
non-family
if you
households.
get a family versus non-family.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would probably give us a
Okay.
better picture.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, possibly.
And again, Rachel, that is all in the context of, so we are as well prepared as possible for policy and programs and everything that meet the community's needs. I think we all feel like it'd be helpful to have a little more breakdown and detail of these specific things. Because
Sure.
again, that's gonna drive some of our discussions of policy and programs.
Sure, yeah, I can definitely make sure that's included in the final report. Okay. Alright, so kind of moving beyond sort of the demographic sort of aspects of the document. So the third question is, what are the current housing characteristics in Shorewood, including owner occupied versus renter occupied, age and condition, size, including number of bedrooms and price range? So highlighted a few things from the report here. So to kind of start with the first chart in the upper left-hand corner, that's just breaking down tenure for each of these areas of comparison. Shorewood's all the way on the far right. So with the exception of the city of Milwaukee, the renter percentage is considerably higher than comparable communities. And as far as who kind of a typical renter household is, in terms of distribution, what we're seeing is it's those people that tend to be kind of in the demographic sort of tail categories, as I was saying earlier, younger renters, so kind of college age, young professionals, and then seniors, 65 plus. And then the typical owner profile is generally going to be married couple, kind of in the 30s to 60s sort of category. That's a typical owner in Shorewood. As far as distribution, this just kind of shows where, again, those renters are concentrated. As you can imagine, the renter percentage is much lower. In the eastern portion, there's less stock there. It tends to be higher priced single-family homes in that area, so there's far fewer renters. And then the percentage is dramatically higher than, again, in the southwestern portion and central portion. And then as far as median home value, the median home value in Shorewood's just over $330,000. Again, the distribution, higher income, higher value homes tend to be in the eastern portion, lower value homes in the southwestern portion. Central kind of falls in the middle. In general, housing costs are fairly high and have risen by a fairly substantial amount. Nearly $50,000 between the 2 years, the two data sets of American Community Survey data that we looked at. So that's kind of, we kind of go into this in a little bit more detail in the document, but Shorewood really only has 5-year estimates from the American Community Survey due to its size. So basically that 5-year average, the 2008 to 2012 versus 2013 to 2017, it's during that time frame what the average median home value was.
Rachel, do we have data on peer communities around us? Timeframes?
Yes.
Are we consistent with others?
Yes,
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, they are. Whitefish Bay is higher. There is some data within the report about comparative communities. I just don't have the numbers readily available on hand, but yes, that is included.
And it's trend data as well, or is it just current data?
I think for the comparable communities, what we have in there now is just current data, but I can put in trend data.
I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm just taking some notes, I don't wanna forget. Alright. Moving on from this. So as far as kind of shifting from owner to renter, so the median gross rent in Shorewood is $948. Again, you see a fairly significant percentage increase over the 5-year period from 846 to 948 on a median basis. And then the spatial graph shows where it's distributed. as with owner sort of value, you know, same sort of trends. You know, in general, I don't think it necessarily has so much at play in this case, but there are fewer renter occupied units in the eastern portion of town, but I don't know that necessarily the distribution is having a dramatic impact on pricing. I mean, certainly that area might be more desirable to some renters, but also it could be said that the central portion of the village would also be desirable. So that's just kind of based overall where the median rents are dispersed. But I guess one thing to also just keep in mind with that data is where are those units located and what percentage of units are within each tract.
Are the appreciation rates we've seen here comparable in other North Shore communities, or are we?
I believe Shorewood's a little bit higher, but I can make sure that we include that in the final report.
Good question.
Make sure you get the comparative data both for the owner and renter data. There is some included in there, I don't recall offhand how detailed it is, but that's something that's easy to put in.
And this is just housing stock that these numbers reflect?
Correct. So this is based on any property that's being rented. So it could be, you know, this is the median rent that a renter is paying, so it could be anything from sort of a traditional multifamily to a duplex or a single family home that's being rented. All right, so this gets into, Julia does a wonderful job in the report of outlining lots of graphs about cost burden, and the reason that we spend a lot of time on this is because the cost burden data is really what sort of fuels the gap in demand analysis and identifies where there might be substantive gaps in the existing housing supply. So I just pulled a few charts to include here, but this first one is looking at cost burdened households, and there's sort of two categories of cost burden. There's just sort of typical cost burden, which is at 30%. So basically a household is cost burdened if they're paying more than 30% of their income to housing costs. And then severe cost burden increases that threshold to 50%. So someone that's paying more than 50% of their income on housing costs. This first chart is just based on counts. So what we've done is broken down households, and this would include both renters and owners, and then we've broken it out by category. This includes households at the various income sort of distributions. So on the far left, you have extremely low income households. So those are people that earn less than 30% of the area median income, all the way up to what we would call above median income households. So someone earning over 100% of the area median income, and then three categories in between. So as far as a total count basis, it kind of follows the trend you would expect. Those that are in the lowest income cohorts have the highest numbers of cost burden, both at the 30% level and severe, and then it sort of trends downward. What's interesting on the owner side, and the owner columns are the sort of orangey ones, what's interesting on the owner side is you have a fairly low percentage in that extremely low income cohort, and then a higher number in the higher income cohorts that are cost burden. But as you'll see in the next slide on a percentage basis, I mean, really what's driving that is there are very few owner occupied households at obviously the very low income cohorts. So
And again, Rachel,
Yeah.
this is likely, sorry, did someone else have a question?
No, that was me.
Okay, I'm sorry. Again, just I'm thinking the green are again possibly related to the student population in the community.
Correct.
Well, I guess that to me is the challenge. Is I feel like it's again on the extremes, that there's the older population that's possibly in there, but also the younger population. Is there any aging information that we could overlay on this that would help us to see that? Because again, I think policy and process is different for those two groups for us as we look forward.
Sure. Yeah, I think we can see about getting some sort of what's available what's available from HUD and then data providers in terms of, age distribution of these groups. It's hard just because this data is all based on HUD, on the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Survey. And then some of the income distribution is based on various other sources, but we might be able to figure something out. But I will look into that.
But, yeah, I mean, I find these charts kind of confusing. I mean, I don't know if we separated renters from owners into, it's just like a lot to be thinking about in one chart.
Sure.
I
Sure.
find it. I don't know if that other people have
Yeah,
that problem.
Maybe it's just me.
What is the difference between cost burden and severely cost burden?
So cost burdens is just at the 30% threshold, so if you're paying more than, so they're sort of, if you think about it, they're sort of cumulative. So if you're paying more than 30%, you're cost burdened. If you're paying more than 50%, you're severely cost burdened.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I can, to your point, there are some charts in the report that kind of build to this, so maybe, not in this one in isolation, maybe it'll make a little bit, maybe it'd be a little bit easier to follow in the final document, but, you know,
Is
I
there
can
a
also
reason
try
to
and
have-
break it
Is there a
down.
reason to have renters and owners in the same chart? Because you're just asking people to think about a lot of different variables at one
Sure,
time.
there's no reason why we couldn't break them apart.
And do the owner, housing costs include property taxes?
So yes, it includes property tax, insurance,
Utilities?
yeah, utilities. We have a narrative in the document that has all the costs outlined, but yes, it's not just your mortgage.